Thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Cutting Edge. But before I get into my interview with Frank and what we think of the Rangers hiring of Peter Laviolette, I strongly encourage you to stick around till the very end of the episode because I'll be paying tribute to a good friend of mine who lost his battle to cancer a little over a week ago by the name of Danny Garuccio. Gooch was a great guy, and the world is worse off without him here. So this one's for you, Gooch.
Scoring chances that period were 7-1 for the opposition. Do you know why, Hartsey? Because it's about as fucking casual as it gets. As casual as it gets. In Boston, we said, all right, got mixed in the schedule. Let's turn the page. Somebody tell me, what the fuck is the difference now? What's the problem now? I want to see people rip their heart out of their fucking chest this period. And if you don't, you're probably not going to like your ice time. Take your first shift, you'll get it, earn the second one. I'm not putting up with it. It's too much horse shit. It's too much. Don't allow it. D-zone coverage, soft down low. Out to the points, casual strides. We don't want to block a shot because it hurts. One game, Boston, all right, let's move on. Tonight, unacceptable. Not going to happen. We're way better than what we just showed. Every guy in here knows it, and you should not accept it. Don't. You got 20 minutes. You win a period, you win a game, we move on. But you need to dig in right now, every guy. Enough is enough. Start playing with some jam in here. Let's go.
Good morning, or good afternoon, or good evening, whatever the hell you're listening to this. You're listening to The Cutting Edge with JackKnife, and this is your host, JackKnife, and we got a returning guest today, my old editor for Elite Sports New York, Frank Curto. Frank, how you doing, bud? Thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Jack. How's everything?
Everything's good. I mean, last time you saw me, this wasn't on my finger, so...
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Frank. For those of you who don't remember, Frank came on a couple NHL off seasons ago. With me and Matt DiGiacomo, we talked some NHL offseason, but, you know, there's some big news going, a lot of news with the Rangers this week. Just a few hours ago, I mean, for those watching on video, I'm wearing a Hockey Hall of Fame shirt for obvious reason. The King, Henrik Lundqvist, is going to the Hockey Hall of Fame.
Well deserved.
Well deserved.
I don't think there was a doubt.
Absolutely. I mean, you do see some people on Twitter, like, doubting it, like, oh, he never won a cup, blah blah blah. But like, you look at his numbers, 459 wins, that's sixth most all time in the NHL and most among European born goalies. But you know, that's not what I invited you on to talk about tonight. The other news the Rangers made in the past couple weeks, they finally got their head coach. They kind of gave, a lot of people a scare with with John Hines, but they ultimately did end up going with Peter Laviolette, which I think was a safe option. And looking at it, I'd say it's a good hire. I'm not like gung-ho over it. Like a few months ago, I would have been gung-ho over it because after hearing about Chris Knoblauch, I was ready to go all in for Chris Knoblauch, take a risk with him because like that's the mystery box hire that he could possibly be a John Cooper, but I guess the mindset of the Rangers right now is that you're in win now mode. You want to, go with the known option. You don't necessarily want to do something that could potentially be disastrous.
Oh, no, I agree. I was high on the Knobloch bandwagon too. For a while, I thought Laviolette was too safe of a pick. But, after looking at it for a while and, you look at his numbers are good. He won a Stanley Cup way back in 2006. After yesterday's press conference, I agreed with the hiring more. Now, I know it's only talk. He's at the press conference. There were no surprises in what he said. But there are a couple of things that, for me, really stood out that you didn't hear from Gallant, which I think you could see right off the bat was the two differences. So I think it's a good move for them, maybe a safe move, excuse me. But if he goes forth with what he said in yesterday's press conference, you might see a different team come playoff time. Because let's be realistic, the last two seasons the Rangers were pretty successful in the regular season. They had a good run 2 years ago, but this year you saw a lot of the deficiencies from regular season hockey to playoff hockey. And you can't put all of that on the coach, but a lot of it was on the coach, especially with in-game decisions. So I think this, if what he said today is something he can carry over, I think the Rangers will be in good shape.
I agree. So let's go into Peter before we get into like some of the quotes he had at the press conference. Let's go into Peter's resume. He's the 37th coach in Rangers history. He's played 12 NHL games in his career, all with the Rangers. The rest of his professional playing career was in the minors. He's 8th all time in wins as a head coach. He's the winningest born American coach. For a while, that was John Tortorella. Ironic, the 2012 Winter Classic, the Rangers and Flyers basically swapped coaches from that time. But like as you said,
Right.
he won the Stanley Cup in 2006 with the Carolina Hurricanes. Rod Brind'Amour was the captain of that team. And he's got 2 other cup appearances in 2010 with the Flyers and 2017 with the Nashville Predators. He's one of 3 coaches since the NHL expansion in 1967 to take 3 different teams to the Stanley Cup. One of the other ones, Mike Keenan, Ranger fans definitely think highly of him,
Yes.
For winning in 94. And Scotty Bowman, needs no introduction. And interestingly enough, the Rangers will be his 6th different NHL team. He's been in New York before with the Islanders. He's won the Cup with Carolina. He had the stint in Philadelphia, Nashville, and he was just let go from the Washington Capitals. And when I look at the situation in Washington, they didn't have a lot of success. I mean, he took them to the playoffs their first year, if I'm not mistaken. But this past season, I don't put at least all of the blame on him. One, he became the coach during COVID. That was such a fluid situation, 1. 2, this is according to a tweet from Capitals PR from April 13th. The Capitals lost 434 man games due to injury this year. And they were relatively competitive this year, but they were sellers at the deadline. And once they sold, the Garnet Hathaways, the Dmitry Orlovs, it was just all downhill. And despite all that, they missed the playoffs. And despite all that, the Washington Capitals still outperformed the Rangers 5-on-5. If you're looking at the screen right now, Money Puck Line, great site. Capitals finished 18th expected goals above average or percentage, however the hell you read that stat. But not great, but you got to take into consideration the injuries and the trades. And the Rangers 22nd. That's not good if you have Stanley Cup aspirations. And I've said this before. I said this on the previous episode I made that took me God knows how long to edit. But you live and die by your power play, you will die. Most of the game is 5-on-5. You can't.
Yes.
Yeah. And besides, there's also other variables you got can take into consideration. If the refs, take the whistles, shove it up their asses, and if you're a bad 5-on-5 team, you're not getting power play opportunities, you're even more screwed.
Very true. But I also think, and Laviolette mentioned it today, defense wins Stanley Cups. Defense wins playoff hockey. Not to say that he doesn't expect from his offense, but he's the kind of coach that it starts from the back end. Starts from your goaltending, starts from your defenseman, and then moves your way up. And that's something that he said he's going to have to, I don't want to say train, but teach or bring to the table that the Rangers really didn't concentrate on. Jack, if you think about it, and Gallant said it when he first started, when he was asked about this, he didn't have a system. Gallant said, I don't have a system. I put my players on the ice, I put my lines out, and they should do their thing. And that proved to be good in the regular season. But when it comes down to Stanley Cup playoff hockey, it's a totally different game. Totally different game. And that hurt him both years in the playoffs. I felt, even though they made it to the Eastern Conference Finals last year, 2 seasons ago. This season, it definitely hurt them, and that's something that Laviolette in his presser brought out. And to get to not so much a quote, but what he said that really grabbed my eye was he feels that the regular season is the place to learn how to play playoff hockey. And I never really heard a coach say it like that. He's like, you have to, what you do in the regular season, you have to bring into the playoffs. You have to be understanding defensive schemes. You have to be understanding offense. You have to bring the ability to step up your play from regular season to the playoffs. And he wants them to do that through the whole regular season. He wants them gearing up literally for a playoff run. And I think that is something you haven't heard a coach say in New York for a while. Because normally you hear, oh, it's an 82-game season. The regular season doesn't mean as much. We'll, just get to the playoffs and all. But he had a different mindset. That statement out of his whole press conference really grabbed my attention. And that wasn't per quote, but it's what he was bringing to the table, that he really believes that your regular season has to be 82 games of learning how to play playoff hockey. And I think that's something, if you think about it, guys like Panarin, who played really good in the regular season and really struggled in the playoffs both years, something he needs to do. So that was refreshing to hear a coach say that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm about to play another quote from him regarding like some of the things it takes to win. Here it is.
I grew up in Massachusetts. My mom and dad are blue collar people. They work really hard, and I think that when you're around that, it becomes generational. If you're observant of it every day on what it takes to be a hardworking person, I think that there's a lot of skill and a lot of talent on this team, from the goaltender to the back end to the forwards, and we definitely need to embrace that, because you find that the teams that go deep into the playoffs and win championships, they're loaded with skill, and so that has to be a part of it. I'm not talking about, what I'm about to say is not trying to take away from that in any manner, but when you watch the playoff games right now, the Final Four and the Final Two, it's just a reminder that the compete inside the game is what makes teams great. It drives them to success. And so I don't think that that's something that you can just ask for. I think that you have to practice that on a daily basis. It has to become habit. It has to become your identity, part of the DNA of who you are. And it has to start in training camp, and it has to be held to a level of accountability. And when you have that and you have the skill, that's how teams push on and they compete for Stanley Cups, win Stanley Cups, and become really good hockey teams.
All right, so I think the obvious takeaway from this quote is that he does want a diverse lineup. Something I brought up in the episode a few weeks ago is that it seemed like the Rangers tried to overload on skill, and that's what they did. They overloaded to the point where they weren't adept to physical play. That is something that falls on Chris Drury. Like, again, that's something I had to be fair to Gerard Gallant to when I talked about that. And we can discuss the potential makeup of what this team's roster will be come opening night. But, it reminds me of this quote from, I don't know if this is an actual Herb Brooks quote or if this was just in the movie Miracle. All-star teams fail because they rely solely on the individual's talent. And sounds like Laviolette wants to take that talent and use it in a system that has the strength and the physicality to complement it. And, he said you need skill, but at the same time, you also got to be willing to work hard. I mean, this means not only beating your opponents by outskating and finessing your way around your opponents, but that also means, winning battles on the boards and doing the little things it takes to win, and so on and so forth. And, you look at the Rangers playoff roster, they were very talented on paper. But, as I said in the video, it wasn't other than Jack Hughes, it wasn't the Jesper Brotts it wasn't the Timo Myers that were hurting the Rangers. It was the Eric Hallas, the Thomas Tatars, those guys that work hard that, really burned their asses.
Oh, I agree. No doubt about that. Those. That's why I was saying that playoff hockey is it's a different animal. Look at this Stanley Cup final. Those two teams, playing with broken bones and torn pecs, and how hard they played to get to that level. And it was a great series. You have to change or adapt game by game, period by period in the playoff hockey. It is just so different than the regular season. And that's where you hope your coach can get the 23 guys he has onto that page, to that system that he wants. So yeah, it does fall on Drury, as you were saying, but as the head coach, you have to deal the hand that you're dealt. And as he's been a coach for so many years, he understands that. Drury did say today that it's a partnership between him and Laviolette, and they already started picking each other's brains about players, player strategy and what they're looking at and what they have now. Of course, he was being careful how he said other players that he would need, because you don't want to tick off anyone on the roster now. But in conjunction with that, it is a partnership. But as the head coach, Laviolette knows Drury has the final say and makes all those moves. And then whoever he has in training camp, and whenever opening night comes, then it's really his turn to take what he's given and turn it into something positive.
Absolutely. And here's another quote. He said, and this kind of piggybacking on what you said, about adapting. Here's what he had to say about, having to adapt in this game.
I think that you always have to adapt, Larry. Like, you have to be able to see what you have and where your strengths are and where your weaknesses are, and you have to play to that a little bit. But I also have, values of what I think is important with regard to a team. It's the thoughts of how we're going to play and the identity that we're going to play with. I've found that a lot of times that players can adapt to that. And that doesn't mean that certain situations or certain opponents or certain parts of the schedule, you don't make adjustments and you don't make changes. But there has to be a clear-cut plan on what it is that we're doing. That's my job to communicate that. It's my job to hold players accountable to that. And sure, there's always a little bit of adjustment and adaptation, but when you can get a team on the same page to play a brand of hockey that you feel, or that I feel, can be successful, I found there to be success that follows.
All right. Now, Gallant really didn't. I mean, he'll push back when you ask him about like a lack of adjustments. But watching the game, like his adjustments were basically, just mix matching different lines, not really much X's and O's stuff. I mean, I consider that the hockey equivalent of just throwing shit at the wall and seeing what sticks. And have you ever seen Semi-Pro, the basketball movie with Will Ferrell?
No.
Okay. I'm not sure if you'll necessarily get this analogy. Those of you who watch the movie will get this, but it's like Gerard Gallant was Jackie Moon and Peter Laviolette's Ed Monix. You need a bit more of an X's and O's guy, if that makes sense. Which, I don't know, head coaches don't really do that much X's and O's stuff. I get it. But, but to go back to this playoff, the lack of adjustments is what led to the Rangers being bounced in the first round, because they went up 0-2. The Devils made their adjustments, and the Rangers, didn't really do much to counteract that. Again, this goes back to what I said a few weeks ago. They really didn't adapt. And, hearing this from Laviolette, how, you always need to adapt. You always need to be on top of your game. I mean, I like to hear that from Laviolette.
I agree, and that was my biggest complaint during the playoffs on other podcasts that I was doing it all. Even when the Devils were winning games against the Rangers in this series, Lindy Ruff was still making adjustments. He wasn't just letting it sit. He was still trying to improve and still trying to improve. And Gallant didn't.
Right.
it wasn't even he wasn't even mixing lines up. He wasn't even trying to change the power play to get it going. Never mind changing the lineup for a night. He wasn't doing any in-game adjustments, and it stood out. I mean, quite to the point of it did cost them the series.
Yeah, and like the most notable thing I could think of, as far as adjustments go, he took Mika Zibanejad out of his office on the power play. Like,
yeah,
that. I mean, he's not as good. I love Mika. He's not as good as Alex Ovechkin, but that's like taking Ovechkin out of that office. They have a very similar office.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It made a lot of that happened once we acquired Patrick Kane. I don't know if he was trying to change things up, but my theory is if it's not broke, why fix it? The team on the power play was quite successful with Zibanejad in that spot. Why would you move it then? And here's a better question: when you're struggling in the playoffs, why wouldn't you go back to it? So again, in-game adjustments that he just failed either to see, or he didn't listen to his assistant coaches, or whatever the reason was. But it was, something that absolutely stood out to Ranger fans.
Absolutely. And one last quote I want to share. And, I like to hear this, what he said about, the development of young players, particularly Laf and Kako. Here it is.
I do think that when you're talking about young players, and this is, kind of why because you're right, it's off of Molly's question as well. Those young players do need an opportunity to grow. They have to be not given, but they have to be given the opportunity to be counted on more. And I think inside of a team, inside of the framework of a team, everybody wants to feel that responsibility. They want to feel valued with what they do. And you're talking about a couple of players who are coming off, I think, maybe their best years, and they're still really young players. And there's a growth that goes with that. You certainly would like to see them take the next step, more minutes, maybe a little higher up the lineup, maybe more power play time. And so with that, there has to be opportunity. And so these conversations will take place. I certainly would like that. And those opportunities will be there for them to grab that ice time and to push.
All right. That sounds like music to my ears. But we've been duped before. As you know, Gerard Gallant said, kids can't be developed when they're buried on the fourth line. So I guess it's okay to bury them on the third line, but
Right. But the quote within the quote, they have to be not given anything, but given the opportunity to grow. So he's not saying, okay, I'm going to put Lafreniere on the second line or on the first line to start. But what he's saying is, as a coach, I have to give him a chance to earn that spot. Right. And that's all a player can ask for him and for Kako. If they can't take advantage of those opportunities when they're there, after this year they'll be in the league, 5 years and 3 years, then that's going to be on them. But so I like how he said they should be given the opportunity to earn that. And if they do earn that, he made it sound like he'd be moving them up and giving them more ice time. So, training camp comes, it's going to be on them to prove that they can take advantage of that. And God willing, if he gives them the opportunity, Ranger fans, seeing a lot more Lafreniere and Kako on the power play, moving around maybe higher up second line, first line here and there. I like a coach that's at least admitting that they have to earn that, but he's going to give them a chance to earn that. That's something you never heard out of Gallant. So, and it's not so much to knock Gallant, Jack. It's just two totally different coaching styles. Yeah, definitely different styles. I think this team needed more structure. It needs a system. Most teams need a system, an understanding of what needs to be done in certain aspects. I mean, you even had that when David Quinn was here. David Quinn had a system where the centers had to play 200 feet hockey. The center had to come all the way back and help the defenseman. He wanted them in there, and that was his system. Whether it worked or not, it was something he tried to implement. And then you got Gallant come here with all this talent, and just like, all right, talent will win the games. And guess what? They didn't win the big games.
No, they didn't. And another, Gallant's hands-off approach was so hands-off. Like, he didn't even build relationships with these guys necessarily. They just looked at each other like colleagues, from what I understand, Peter Laviolette has, been in contact with some of the players on the roster. Like he met Adam Fox prior to the press conference. I mean, something that one of the things that worries me about Laviolette is that he does eventually like wear on players. Like he's kind of like forced his way out on his previous stops. But at the same time, the Rangers only gave him a 3-year contract, which, I guess, might be perfect for him. But I do like the hear that, he's getting to know his guys. They could be a guy that they could want to run through a brick wall for. I mean, I kind of wanted to listening to some of his quotes.
I agree. But, the 3-year contract isn't bad if you think about the last 2 coaches. Quinn lasted, I think it was 3 seasons. Gallant only lasted 2 seasons. So maybe the Rangers are like, let's go with this slow, and we can, renegotiate contracts as things improve and get better. I think the organization needs stability behind the bench. You can't have 3 coaches in the last 5 years. It's no good for anyone, and it's kind of wasting time. Now you got another coach coming in, another setup coming in, a different system. He may play, Jacob Trouba and Fox differently. He may break up the Trouba and Keandre Miller setup. You don't know what's in his mindset and his assistant coach's mindset. So in essence, you're kind of starting over again. You did the same thing when you got rid of Quinn, you brought Gallant in. Now you got rid of Gallant. You need stability. You look at some of these other teams and coaches, for the most part, the ones that are there longer, you get some sort of consistency. You don't always get championships. I understand that. But in New York, you just can't keep changing and changing and changing.
I mean, sorry to interrupt. Just look at Carolina. Look at Tampa Bay. I mean, Carolina hasn't won any cups, but, they're always near the top. It's just, they don't have the most talented roster. I mean, I don't know if I necessarily agree with that take. I mean, Svechnikov, Aho are pretty talented guys. But,
they were hurting too in the playoffs. So
absolutely. They lost a lot of guys
but
to injury.
They do what you said, though. They go through a brick wall for Brindamore, that team. And that's what you want. That's a group of hockey players that are on the same page. It's the same thing from what I read about the Golden Knights this year in Cassidy, even though he's only here 1 year. Those guys bought into what he wanted to do, and there was a mutual respect right off the bat with them. And look, they weren't hot early on. They played well, but they got better. The same thing with the Florida Panthers. They barely made it into the playoffs, got hot at the right time, hit some major injuries from what I read following the Stanley Cup final. But another thing, they love playing for Maurice. And that's what it's just because you're the coach doesn't mean you and the team are separate. This isn't the 1980 Olympics when Herb Brooks wanted them to be against them, so they had something to mutually agree on.
Right.
Here, your coach needs not so much respect always, but they need to want both to win for the same reason. They need to have that same goal. They can't be animosity all the time. And I'm sure you heard the same thing I heard. Drury was having words with Gallant, and back to November was considering replacing him. There was a lot of stuff on the bench with the players and the coach in the locker room. It wasn't what I think everyone thought it would be when Gallant got hired. Look, when Gallant got hired, I thought it was a great hire.
Me too.
I liked him. I thought he'd be great. I didn't think it'd be like the way it did. So I'm just looking for consistency. Let's hope Laviolette's here for 5-6 years and we get some good runs out of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the thing is, Knobloch's still in the organization. I think they're still kind of like grooming him for like not now, for the future, especially if they gave Laviolette only 3 years. But people consider this a stale hire. It's like, oh, another retread. But at the same time, retreads do get rehired for a reason. I don't even know what. I think this is Bruce. The Golden Knights just won the Stanley Cup. Is this Bruce Cassidy's 3rd NHL team?
Oh, I don't remember. I don't remember if it's 3rd or 2nd.
All right.
I forgot where he was before Boston.
Well, regardless, the 2 teams that were in the Stanley Cup had retread coaches. So it's not like, oh, you're definitely not going to win with that, with a retread coach. But yeah, the exit interviews especially just had me like, good God, like, Gallant, what do you do here? Like, players are asking for help. That goes back to my semi-pro analogy. Like, you need X's and O's, especially if your players are asking for help. But anyway, Two other things we'll touch on, the assistant coaches and, possible roster makeup. Dan Muse will be joining Peter Laviolette behind the bench. He was with him in Nashville. Another guy is Phil Housley, who was also an assistant coach with Laviolette. And Michael Pekka, well, this is according to Arthur Staple, will be on the Rangers staff too. And I'm going to share my screen with you again. This is from Johnny Lazarus. I'm sure you probably follow him on Twitter.
Yes.
He spoke to a good friend of his that played for Pekka for the Rochester Americans this season. And here's the quote: Pekka's detail and habits went a long way to develop younger guys like Quinn and Peterka. I hope I pronounced that right. He might be exactly what Laviolette needs to unlock his potential. I mean, that I'm assuming who he's referring to there is Lafreniere in particular.
Right.
Because let's get into the roster makeup for this upcoming season, and then we'll wrap it up. I mean, we talked about before how the kids need opportunities. Lafreniere was the most disappointing player this postseason. I don't think much people would disagree with you on that. No points. Here's an interesting stat I showed you earlier today. Lafreniere has more even strength goals the past 2 seasons than Mika Zibanejad. Now, that stat didn't show how many even strength assists Lafreniere had, but still, you look at that, I'm like, the kid he's still young. I think he's just barely old enough to drink right now. I mean, I don't want, you got the faction of fan base that's ready to ship him off, oh, get him out of here. I mean, and I said this last episode. Do you think Senator fans regret trading Mika Zibanejad?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So, and the cap situation, the Rangers are in a very tight cap situation. So I don't know what kind of moves they can make, because they have skill. Maybe they could make a trade or two. It's ironic. I'm sure they want to keep Barclay Goodrow. He's the type of player they need. They need physical guys.
Yes.
But, they might have to trade him because he's making too much money. But, some guys that come to mind, here's my top 2 candidates. Not necessarily saying likelihood it would happen, but I think would help. One I talked about last time, Jesper Fast. The other one being Garnet Hathaway, because he played under Laviolette in Washington, and from what I understood, he did well in Boston, and he could potentially be one of those shutdown guys. He's not necessarily a top 6 guy, I'd say, but he could be, one of those a guy you put on a shutdown line. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. I think the Rangers' 4th line was a pretty good shutdown line once they had VC on it and Goodrow was on it and Tyler Mott. You see, the problem with bringing guys in and out in the bottom 6 category is that's not going to help their 5-on-5 scoring.
Gotcha.
For the most part. Trading Goodrow would absolutely help the salary cap. But now, who are you going to bring back that has that skill and can do the job that he does? He could play the 4th line, the 3rd line. If need be, he could go on the 2nd line. He's a very versatile player. And like you said, he's that guy that when you're in a playoff run, he gives you that grit that you're looking for. So if you're going to trade a player like that, you also got to remember you got to bring someone back like that. Yeah. Otherwise, whenever you make a trade, you want to feel that you did better than the other team. You want to feel that your team's improved. Trading Lafreniere right now isn't going to save you any money anyway. He's just coming off his entry-level contract. What's his cap at? $925.
Yeah, so, and you're not getting a
free agent. You're not going to get much. He's a restricted free agent as well as K. Andre Miller. I would think the Rangers are going to try to settle the Miller situation.
100%, they're going to do a bridge deal for both of them.
Way before they look at the Lafreniere thing. So the Rangers are stuck with a horrible cap situation because they have some bad contracts. I mean, Panarin's making over 11. Zibanejad, Kreider, Trouba, Fox. Not that these players are bad, but their contracts are huge. All no move clauses. You can't just say, we're going to try to get rid of Panarin's contract. He may not want to be moved. And who's going to take on an $11 million contract? You're probably going to eat at least half of that if you could even if he even wants to be moved.
And just think
So-
about it. He turned down more money from the Islanders.
Right. So and not that I want him to go anywhere.
I
but when
don't
you're
either.
looking- When you're looking at, when you're on cap friendly, right? And you're looking at those salaries, you're like, well, how do you improve on your cap when so many of these top dollars at high percentage of your salary cap, you're locked in because of no move contracts. Your leverage is all out of your hands. But now you go back to what you were saying. Who could you move to help? Pedro's name keeps coming up because he's the one that's the probably the easiest to move if you had to, because his salary hit isn't bad. But
Right.
I think that hurts the team. So it's they were in a bad spot last year.
You're stuck between a rock and a hard place.
Yep, and that's on Drury.
Right.
Not all of it. Not all of it. A lot of it was Gordon and JD, but that's on the general manager, whoever you want to lay blame to. Once again, Laviolette is going to have to worry about whoever's on the ice opening night. That's how we're going to make it work. And you see what happens from there. Do they try to re-sign Kane after the hip surgery?
I
Maybe
don't want to.
I wouldn't want to. People saying you can get him in that $2 or $3 million range. I would love for them to go after Tarasenko. I thought he played well in a short time here. He looked confident. The team played well with him. I had heard that he's selling his house in St. Louis. That doesn't mean that he's coming to New York, but we'll know more next weekend when all of that action starts.
Absolutely. I mean, you've heard me say it again and again. I am so gung-ho on Brendan Othman. I mean, I'm more excited for him. I genuinely mean this. I am more excited for him than I was for Lafreniere and Kakko, simply because he seems to be the exact type of player the Rangers need. Like, this goes back to something Elliot Friedman said in 32 Thoughts. Stanley Cup, you need to have a team full of pricks. And like, he models his game after Matthew Tkachuk. He scores a lot of points, and he gets under your skin.
Mm-hmm.
I won't be too upset if he starts this season in Hartford. They kind of, don't rush his development. But, I would love to see Othman on the Rangers roster this upcoming year.
And the question is now, where do you put him? Because putting him on the fourth line is a total
I don't want him
waste.
on the fourth. I mean, I don't think a year on the third line would hurt him. And if you decide he needs more playing time, like, per game, you could probably send the Hartford the next year. And I think he'd understand it. Like, because I'm sure you listened to the last episode. I talked about his character. The kid sounds like he's willing to help his team in whatever way he can. So, yeah, I think that's a good note to end it on. I will say this. Last episode, I gave the boldest take I ever had in the history of my stupid podcast. I said the New York Rangers will win the Stanley Cup in 2025. I don't think they're going to do it this year. I think they're going to improve from this year, but I think next year is the year they do it. If they hired John Hines, I was going to rescind that, but you know what? Only Scotty Bowman so far is the only coach in NHL history since expansion to win with multiple teams. I mean, I don't see why Laviolette can't do that with an elite goalie in Igor Shesterkin, an elite defender, and Adam Fox, and if he can unlock Panarin's potential in the playoffs, bald Artemi Panarin. I don't know if you saw those pictures.
Yes.
I think he can, he's good right away. I'm willing to give him a chance, see what happens. Anything else you'd like to say real quick?
No, I agree with everything you said. I'm looking forward to training camp. I want to see something different. And he emphasized it all starts right out of camp and right into preseason games. So it's going to be a different year for hockey for the Rangers. I think they're going to have a coach that has an agenda, and they're all going to have to fall in line with it. So I'm curious to see how it shakes out.
All right. Now, before you go, Frank, would you like to plug some of your work and where everyone could follow you?
You can follow me on Twitter at Ranger Proud, and on Facebook, obviously, at Ranger Proud. I'm also on Instagram at Frank Ranger Proud, and I write quite often for Empire Media Sports. So check it out. And I've been posting all my articles there as I go. And I look forward to all the banter and Rangers Twitter exploding. It'll be fun.
It will be. Thanks for coming on, Frank.
All right, bud. You have a good night.
You guys, if you made it this far, thank you very much for listening. Be sure to subscribe to us on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to follow us on all our social medias at Funds Podcast on Twitter and Instagram, and on Facebook at Fat Unlike Nerds Talking Sports. This is JackKnife alongside Frank Curto. Have a wonderful night, everyone.
Let me start by saying I'm thrilled to be here as the coach of the New York Rangers. I understand the history and importance of being able to coach an original six team. We have a really good team and really good players. And my staff and I will work tirelessly pushing towards a common goal of bringing the Stanley Cup to New York. My message, I guess, to everybody is let's go to work. Let's get working. And like I said, I think that we have really good pieces in place, but to me, it's about that work ethic that drives teams. And so I think that the messaging for me with the players is that we're going to start working in training camp, and we're going to take it through the season and try to prepare ourselves for the playoffs and the push.
Thank you very much for listening to this episode of The Cutting Edge. I hope you enjoyed the conversation I had with Frank. As you could tell, we're optimistic about the Rangers. Very optimistic. But this next segment isn't sports related. This isn't to me talking to you as JackKnife. JackKnife's an exaggerated version of myself. This is me talking to you as regular old Jack Lonergan. And I want to talk to you about a kid by the name of Danny Garuccio. It's safe to assume that a good amount of you listening to this podcast did know Danny. And if you didn't know Danny, then I feel sorry for you. Danny's nickname was the Mayor of Monroe because he just knew everyone. I met Danny in the spring of 2018. He ended up becoming one of my coworkers at the time. Just by chance, I ended up finding out that he knew my soon-to-be future father-in-law because they ended up going to the same cigar shop. But the moment I met Danny, I could tell there was just something about this kid. Like, when you talk to Danny, nothing was ever about him. It was always about you. He wanted to know how you were doing, how your family was doing, how your girlfriend or spouse was doing, if you were happy, if you was able to help in any way, shape, or form. Like, the kid was a genuinely kind person. Many people called him a giver. And, some of the best times I had working that job were when I was with Gooch, as we all called him. I worked that job up until, close to when I left New Jersey to work for ESPN at the time. But, he wished me congratulations. He was always there to congratulate you on a life event, whether it was getting engaged or landing your dream job. And, even if you did lose touch, in years since, you stopped working together. So to think back to when he was diagnosed with brain cancer a few years ago, I was in shock how something so horrible can happen to someone so kind. Because I will say it right here, if I made a list of top 3 nicest people I've ever met, Danny for sure would be number 1, and it would be quite the gap between whoever's in second. And unfortunately for me, the only time I was able to see him since his cancer diagnosis was a fundraiser in Staten Island at Auntie Butchie's. I walked in, we made eye contact, we gave each other the biggest hug, and you see the smile on his face, how he was talking to everyone. You never would have known he was battling this horrible disease. And it reminds me of this quote from the late ESPN Sports Center anchor Stuart Scott. When you die, it does not mean you lose to cancer. You beat cancer by how you live, why you live, and in the manner in which you live. And Danny exemplified that quote, because everyone who knew him was a better person for knowing him. And I guess the only way I could really end this is to say that, Danny, you've only been in my life for a few short years, but I've always had the pleasure of talking to you. You know, my coworkers to this day, or my former coworkers to this day, still love you to death. I love you to death. The world's worse off without you here. If there were more of you in the world, it would be a much better place. And I don't know for sure if there's a God, if there's a heaven. I hope there is, because it means one day it'll all make sense. I think there is. I can't wait to see you. I can't wait to see you again one day, buddy. I'm gonna miss the hell of you. All right. Thank you very much for coming into my life and being just this beacon of light in a world that can sometimes be scary, sometimes be depressing. I'm gonna miss the hell out of you. And I can't wait to see you again one day, buddy. I love you.